My name is Andrew. As many of you may know, I am not a father, but that does not stop me from indulging myself in some of the joys of fatherhood. As an example, I don't know if any of you knew this, but glass coffins are starting to make a splash. We don't know if they're going to stay around, but remains to be seen. When I think about fatherhood, I think about three things: grace, humility, and humor. And for those of you who are parents, I'm sure those are no-brainers. Having not been a parent, it seems as though if I walk in the world with those three things, I'm going to be okay, which is pretty remarkable. And for those of you, well, all of you who haven't known a former version of myself, it's a minor miracle that I'm standing here given my lengthy recovery that I've had from what was a very challenging case of terminal cynicism, and took years to overcome that. Why so much cynicism? Well, there was a recession, and I worked in retail, and holidays took on a different meaning. It became too much about selling crap to people who didn't need it, or just pushing money into a register and stuff out the door. And so it became very difficult to take holidays seriously. And thankfully that ended. I got over myself, my cynicism. The recovery is still in progress. There are days, and especially if I read the newspaper, it can become difficult to come back from that. But grace, humility, and humor have carried me, and the places that those three values have come from unequivocally are my father, but also the other fathers who've been in my life, such as Jim, who taught me how to drill holes in the ice, and then remember where you put them so as not to put your foot through the ice and shorten the day for everybody, because children with frozen feet are a blast, I'm told. I did not step through the ice. Primo, who made sure every kid on that baseball team felt like they were a valued member of that baseball team. John, who treats every child in his household like they're his own, with same expectations, same kindness, same variable degree of patience sometimes. And the humility part, whereby none of these fathers placed themselves above any other man. They made sure that you knew that their role was to serve you, not to serve themselves. And that might also have contributed to the cynicism, because I naively thought, well, aren't all people this kind, thoughtful, graceful, humble, silly? I don't know if any of you read the newspaper, but there was a story that came out last week. The runner-up to the world champion tongue twister contest was indicted, charged, and is seemingly going to be found guilty for a crime that's not suitable to comment on from the pulpit, but legal experts say that this person will be given one very tough sentence. Yeah. Set aside the ego, and this is one of the greatest gifts that these men have given to me, and including some of the men in this room too have displayed such generosities, and I'm truly humbled and disappointed that I don't get to share that with kids of my own, but I do get to share it daily, both in the public eye and my roles in literally serving other people over the last number of years, and in serving them, making sure they have the same benefit of the grace and humility and humor that these great men in my past have shown me. I didn't know how hard it was for my folks, and especially my father, to do that for me. I didn't know as a child what it took, what they were doing. I only knew that they were doing it by themselves. We had no grandpas, no grandmas, no families around, and that was purposeful, that my folks, in an effort to be better parents and especially a better father, moved 500 miles away from where they were raised so as not to expose us to their fathers, which I didn't understand as a child and even into adulthood until it was explained to me, some of the behaviors that went on with those folks, and now understand that one of the best things you can do in guiding young people is to make sure you give them the best environment you can, even if that means removing yourself from an environment you know might provide some support, solace, service, comfort, but in reality, the best choice is to put yourself and your children in a place where you can serve them the best. And that meant moving 500 miles away. I never understood why we didn't have grandpas and grandmas around. It was because grandpas specifically were not the best of men. And in learning that in adulthood and understanding how my father and mother made that decision to get away from a very bad example of parenting to become a very good example of parenting by not being around those folks. And then I gave it a bunch more thought and realized not only did they do that, remove themselves from very challenging family members, they also took the time and effort to include men and women, but in this case we're talking about the men, in our lives that continued to show grace, humility, and humor all the time. I think back of the men that we were surrounded with. There was never a temper that was out of control. There was never poor judgment. There was never substances indulged too much. There was never preachiness, somewhat ironically. No moral authority. I am above all. And again, the humility. And what a great gift that they had to go through such a hard thing. And especially my father. I didn't know his father was an alcoholic sociopath until I was in my 30s. But what a great gift for them to step away from that, to be able to give me grace, humility, humor, kindness. And again, not having any children of my own, it is one of the greatest gifts I know I could share with people, all shapes, sizes, creeds, colors, whatever you want to say, but especially when they're kids, to be able to set aside the ego and just be silly for a little bit and ask them really silly, ridiculous questions like, why not cheddar cheese chocolate chip cookies? Sounds good to me. I like cheese. What kid doesn't like chocolate chip cookies? Why not everything broccoli? Today is the day where everything is broccoli. All we're going to eat is broccoli. No! Yes, broccoli is wonderful. No! Well, it can go on and on and on, but the joy in getting a rise out of kids and sometimes adults, I am forever grateful for the difficulties some of these men have gone through to put me in a place to be able to operate with grace and humor and humility. And I'm eternally grateful to all those kind and gentle and thoughtful men, and especially, when appropriate, the silly ones. And I'll conclude with this. Well, you decide for yourself. What do a mole and an eagle, mole as in the rodent, what do a mole and an eagle have in common? They both live underground, except for the eagle.
My father had no intention of being a dad. He had his heart set on being an artist, a starving artist or otherwise. It didn't matter as long as he could do his art. He was the oldest son in a family of 8 children, with immigrant parents from Hungary who expected him to help support the family as soon as he finished the 8th grade, which I think was the law at that time. As a child, he made himself a work table in the shed behind the family house, where he could escape to a quiet place to draw, to paint, to carve wood, just to create anything. When he was old enough, he took night classes at the Cleveland Institute of Art while working as a carpenter with his stepfather during the day. His birth father had died as a result of lung disease working in the mines in southern Ohio. As a skilled carpenter, he continued that trade after the war and the rest of his working life. But his love of doing art, drawing, painting, sketching, never left him. When I was old enough to notice, I'd see him sketching on the blank edges of newspapers or drawing on the back of a used envelope. In his spare moments, my dad had a pen, pencil, or paintbrush in his hand. Watching TV, I'd see him drawing characters of TV personalities. His calligraphy was also elegant and beautiful. A used envelope might have the words, "Brush your teeth with Pepsodent," in the most skilled Spencerian handwriting with grand flourishes and shading. He also had a quiet corner in our basement where he set up a bench so he could paint in oils and watercolors away from the noise and activity of an 8-person household. I'd slip down to his studio to see what he was working on and was fascinated by the tubes of paint, the brushes, the stacks of paper that he managed to scarf up from somewhere. He never bought paper. He'd save the cardboard from cereal boxes to paint on. Being around his artwork and art tools was so exciting and inspiring to me. When we children got old enough, he'd bring art supplies up from the basement studio and spread them out on the kitchen table for his children to use. My sister and I were the most interested, and we would draw or paint for hours on Sunday morning after reading the Sunday funnies. We'd copy some of the cartoons, ladies in the comic strip, or try to draw portraits of movie stars from the front page of the paper. We did numerous portraits of our parakeets, Judy and Arnold. My sister lost interest over the years, even though she was more skilled than I was. But I continued on. I loved to illustrate whatever was in front of me. My dad would only occasionally make adjustments or corrections to my drawings. Mostly, he just provided the materials. His work was an example to me and provided the encouragement for me to keep on. He didn't say much, but the silent, quiet support came through clearly. He would pin my paintings on the acoustic wall tiles in our breakfast room as if it was an art gallery. It was riddled with pinholes. He showed me how to use pen and ink, pastels, and watercolors. He made a large desk available for my art supplies and a place for me to work in the hallway, in the hallway that's on the way to our bedrooms upstairs. I was in heaven when I got to use that desk. I felt so complete and so honored. I see how back then I was mirroring his life as a hobby artist, having a place to create away from distractions, a place filled with art supplies and a wall where I could hang my artwork. I don't use the backs of envelopes or cereal boxes to draw like my dad did, but I do sketch, color, plan paintings while we're watching TV. I think he destroyed all of his artwork when he took art classes at the Art Institute in Cleveland. But we do share, and as he got older, his hand was less steady. Drawings were simpler, and as long as he could, he had a pencil in his hand drawing. My dad's legacy, his most memorable bequest to me, is the love of doing art, no matter how skilled or unskilled. That did not matter. It's the process that is so nurturing to my soul. The playing with details, shapes, forms, and especially color. And then sharing that artwork with others. What could be better? Thanks, Dad, for the gift of wanting to create beautiful things that delight me and hopefully others. I laid out some of his later sketches when he's probably in his 70s and older on the table in the Friendship Hall. If you'd like to see some, I only have one piece that I was able to find from when he was a student at the Art Institute, and you'll see the real difference. But and he also did wood carvings as he got older, and I brought in one wood carving for you to look at. Thank you.
And for any of you who don't know this, Rose Toth's art is in our foyer in the triplexes, if you want to do any comparison. Sandra, please come.
I've enjoyed the fact that we all approach this differently. What fun. So my father's name was Lawrence, Larry to his friends, born in 1917 and died in 2007. He lived most of his life in central Illinois, and most of it farming the land and living in the house where he was actually born. He married Doris, my mother, and I was born just on the fringe of what we call the baby boomers. 2 other daughters came shortly after. So I'm going to share a few thoughts today about him and some ways that it has affected me today. His time away from the farm was during World War II, where he became a first lieutenant in the Army Air Corps and a pilot of a B-24. When I asked him many years later about that experience, he would always pivot to stories about his crew. Against military protocol, he told them to call him Larry, not lieutenant, and then he said they would have gone to hell and back for me. He said that they spent a lot of time trying to find beer in North Africa, but he would never talk about dropping bombs. My dad was raised by a dad, my grandfather, who rarely smiled. I was always a little afraid of my grandpa Sam, so I have an idea of how my dad was raised. When my dad graduated high school, he was a very good student, and he won a scholarship to play baseball at Illinois State University, what is now Illinois State University. Sam asked him what he wanted to study in college. My dad said he didn't know, and so Sam told him, well, then you might as well stay on the farm, which he did. My dad wasn't like Sam in all ways, but in many ways he was. Pretty much what my dad said was final. There was not a lot of discussion about decisions he made. In 8th grade, I wanted a pair of penny loafers, but my dad insisted I wear brown Oxfords that were not attractive at all. And as a student at Illinois State University many years later, I came home and announced that I was going to join the Peace Corps with my roommate so we could teach in other countries. My dad let go with a very colorful vocabulary and expletives about JFK. Needless to say, I was smart enough to know there would be no further discussion about the Peace Corps. But I never questioned that my dad supported me, even though he never said so. He never said, I love you. He never told me and my sisters when we did something good. Do you think he told us when we did something wrong? Oh, yes. He didn't give a lot of encouragement or praise for the things we accomplished, We just kind of understood we were supposed to do the right thing, do our homework, keep our rooms clean. I had to learn that as a teacher, I couldn't expect kids to know that I was happy with what they were doing. I had to actually tell them that, and that sounds strange, but I actually kind of had to learn that lesson. As a camp director, I remember one time a staff member saying to me, she needed to hear from me from time to time she was doing a good job. I felt really bad, but I kind of knew where all that came from. My dad, very different side of him, had an amazing tenor voice. He sang in the church choir when Gulf weather wasn't very good. And he sang in the car and sometimes embarrassed me and my sisters. I do sometimes start singing when Barrett is in the car, and she says, "Grandma, why do you start singing with everything I say?" He mellowed as he got older and thoroughly enjoyed his grandchildren. A lot of silliness, the kind that Andrew was referring to, and some of the sternness was gone. He loved to play with them, tease them, make them laugh. And as an adult, I was able to have some really good discussions about world affairs, politics, and so on, even though we didn't always agree. He was an avid reader and a lifelong Republican. Think Everett Dirksen, the senator from Illinois who worked with Hubert Humphrey, the Democrat, for the Civil Rights Act. But he sometimes voted for Democrats. You have to keep in mind that if you're from Illinois, politicians of both parties tended to end up in jail, and that includes several governors. And so a lot of people had to switch from one party to the other unless they wanted to vote for somebody who was in prison. I think he may have actually voted for Barack Obama for Senate when he ran for U.S. Senate from Illinois. Both my dad and mom were very civic-minded. They voted in every election and often worked at the polls. They both joined a lot of civic groups. My dad was elected to the school board. They truly believed, well, actually, I just thought of a quick story there. This is really cool. He told me one time that when they were trying to make some cuts, that some of the men, it was all men on the school board then, wanted to cut the salaries of the women who were married because they had husbands who supported them. My dad said that wasn't a good idea, and I'm like, yes. He truly believed democracy was the best form of government. As a veteran, he was one of those people who really respected the flag, and he would often go to the cemetery to fire one of the guns for the salutes to the veterans who had died. In a way, my dad affected my politics today because I still feel connected to those central Illinois conservative ways of thinking and ways of life. Recently, a friend of mine told me she was real upset about a politician who referred to himself as a redneck. When I asked her why, she said, well, that redneck meant that he strongly believed in the right to bear arms and we shouldn't have any rules about guns. I said, no, it meant that he was a farmer who wore a baseball cap and sunburned the back of his neck. I knew this because my dad had a sunburned neck most of the time. Today, most of us are very upset over, I heard you, Joanne. Most of us are very upset over the political nastiness in our country, and I feel that too, but I also feel a huge sadness that the party my dad supported most of his life would be unrecognizable to him today. He would be shocked to hear the party leadership espousing values that were the opposite of what he believed. I am grateful in some ways that he was already gone when our former president called John McCain a loser. My dad would have come up with a whole bunch of new four-letter words if he had heard that. So today I'm grateful for my rural upbringing, some of my conservative views from my dad. I think it helps me understand some of the political turmoil we're living through right now. I'm grateful to my dad and mom for their unwavering support to their children, even though they didn't often tell us, and to their country. They were both the kind of people Tom Brokaw referred to as the greatest generation. And I enjoy singing in the car and making Barrett laugh. I'm sure the day will come when she tells me it's embarrassing. But we come full circle, and what a wonderful legacy to leave.